Welcome back. Passing the torch. President Biden has put weeks of Democratic Party turmoil to rest after he announced Sunday afternoon that he would be bowing out of the presidential race and endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris to take over. We'll talk about more of the thinking behind Biden's decision, what Vice President Harris has been up to in the 48 hours since the seismic change, how former President Donald Trump feels about all of this, and take a peek into Harris's search for a new running mate. We'll be talking about those stories and more today, July 23rd, 2024. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show, with me, your host, Ishan. Thank you so much for joining us today. The 2024 election is now over as we knew it. This race is completely unrecognizable from where it was just 48 hours ago. As of Sunday morning, this election was between two old guys who the country had seen before, and we were on track to have a repeat of the 2020 election. And with one of the two beating handedly all their primary competition by January of this year, this was slated to be the longest general election in American history. Now, it's safe to say that no American was interested, no American was ready, and no American was excited. As someone covering this election through this show and just as a political observer, I can admit I wasn't terribly interested and pretty much, because we were having the same exact election. Then these last 54 days in American politics made this election one for the history books. First, former President Donald Trump was convicted by a jury of his peers in the Stormy Daniels hush money payment case, making him the first criminally indicted former president in American history. He subsequently raised $50 million in small dollar donations after that conviction, also breaking records in its own right. Then the following month, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump then met in Atlanta for the first presidential debate of this election season. And it was historic even before they met because it was going to make history as the first time the Commission on Presidential Debates would not be hosting and running a presidential debate since its creation. And it was also the earliest we had gotten a presidential debate ever. The stakes were incredibly high for both candidates, with the eyes of the nation on both of them. So then President Biden had that incredibly disastrous debate performance that we all remember, and it sparked chaos in the Democratic Party about his viability as a candidate. Around that time, we also got the landmark immunity ruling from the Supreme Court, which essentially ruled that former President Donald Trump and all former presidents were immune from prosecution for their acts as president, including in this January 6th case, since all their actions were considered official presidential acts. This decision then postponed Trump's sentencing date from the initial July 11th date for the Stormy Daniels conviction. Then later that month, former President Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt which left the country shocked. And then he, just within days, announced Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to be his running mate in the election. And then that was followed by a Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, in which the Republican Party was presented as the most united Republican Party we had seen in nearly 50 years. And throughout all of that time, since the debate, President Biden was fighting challenges from within his own party and challenges to his candidacy, as multiple Democratic elected officials continued to call on Biden to bow out of the presidential race. So, as if the nation didn't need any other seismic developments, President Biden then announced via social media on X and Instagram, just on a normal Sunday afternoon, that he would be withdrawing from the 2024 presidential race and endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris to succeed him. Whoa, there's not a lot left to say. To say American politics has been chaotic is a gross understatement. We have been living through history. I'm serious when I say that the textbooks that students will be studying in 50 years will have entire chapters dedicated to the chaos of the last 50 days, of the last 44 years, and the 21st century in its entirety. And we are a part of that now. What a time to be alive. Someone make that the H&S Show's new motto, because honestly, it is such an interesting time to be alive. Now, that was a look at all of what happened, but before we look at the dynamics of this race, and believe me, there's no time to waste in looking at that, I want to take a closer look into President Biden's decision, his legacy, and what the next 6-ish months look like for him for the remainder of his term. I brushed on his exit on this whole topic in the emergency episode posted on Sunday, so you can go listen to that for more context. But in the immediate aftermath of that chaotic debate that happened on June 27th, I remember reading the headlines on CNN and MSNBC in their post-debate coverage, which said that Democratic Party officials were freaking out about President Biden's performance, and everyone was nervous. And the anxiety was practically screaming at all of us from the TV screens, from the news reports. And it's because that performance was really big, and President Biden really blew expectations because he had to prove that age was not going to be an issue of this campaign, his age specifically. Unfortunately for him, gaffe after gaffe and instances where he lost his train of thought and appeared as old, all of it really made Democrats nervous behind the scenes. Here are some of those clips compiled by the Wall Street Journal off of the president's debate performance.
What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death.
In the subsequent weeks, nearly 40 Democratic lawmakers and other elected officials came out and calling on President Biden to drop out of the 2024 election in a way we had not seen before. President Biden was, initially very resistant to the calls. And in interview after interview, he insisted that he wasn't dropping out and that wasn't something he was considering. His campaign even began to ramp up his public schedule, and he was, attending a lot more events. But for many in the party that were critical of him, it just wasn't enough. Now, we know that President Biden dropped out of the 2024 election on Sunday afternoon after he posted a letter on social media. Before that, he was diagnosed with COVID, so he had been isolating at his home in Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, where he was mulling his political future. We are now learning that President Biden had come to the decision to drop out around Saturday afternoon, so a full 24 hours before he announced. It was when two of his closest advisors, Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donilon, came to him with internal polling which showed that his path to 270 electoral votes was virtually non-existent. For President Biden, the parameters he had set out for dropping out of the race were not so clear, but they did have some merit to them based on the decision we got. A, he didn't have a path to victory. B, someone else had a better path to winning the election. And C, if he had any medical issues. Those were his parameters for dropping out of the 2024 race. President Biden didn't have any medical issues, or at least no medical concerns influenced this decision that we were getting from the West Wing, but he was shown that he had no path to victory. Amid all the Democratic lawmakers calling on him to drop out, we are also now learning that former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who had been working behind the scenes to get President Biden to drop out, who has also devoted herself to the House of Representatives and winning a Democratic majority, was planning on publicly calling on President Biden to drop out later this week, which understandably would have been bruising for him. Nancy Pelosi is a Democratic power broker, and she knows how to read the tea leaves, and she never hesitates to make a call. She gave him an ultimatum, basically, and she said, either you're going to drop out or I'm going to make you. Big dollar donors began to withhold tens of millions of dollars, and grassroots donations began to dry up significantly. Biden's campaign was beginning to fail and collapse, and people even working in the Biden campaign saw the writing on the wall, but he didn't want to budge. So ultimately, this decision for President Biden came down to two things, or one thing really, his legacy. What did he want to be remembered for? Did he want to be remembered as the president who refused to give up power and lost the election to Trump? Or did he want to be remembered for a historically productive administration, achieving, really, let's be honest, more legislative victories in 3.5 years that most two-term presidents could have only dreamed of doing? President Biden chose to preserve his legacy, and he told us then that he would be dropping out of the race. He subsequently then endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris to be his successor, fundamentally altering this presidential race. He'll be addressing the nation tomorrow evening at 7 Central, 8 Eastern, to explain more of his thinking behind this decision. Harris's candidacy was basically announced through that endorsement, and then she later posted a statement for herself on all platforms saying, quote, "I'm honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination," she declared, saying, continuing, quote, "We have 107 days until Election Day. Together we will fight, and together we will win." So we just took a look at how we got here and and what the path ahead might be. When we come back, we will take a look at the future of this race and how President Donald Trump feels about the changes. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. In today's fast-paced and chaotic political landscape, it's more important than ever to stay informed and responsible as voters. That's why the Ishan S. Show is here, to help you make sense of it all. It's my mission to democratize news access, provide unbiased reporting, and deliver real analysis on the biggest issues of our time. And I love this job so much because it allows me to teach and inform so many people, specifically young people, about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. And so if you find my episodes valuable, please share them with your friends and family. It's the best way to help this show grow. Please don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, and check out the political news blog and subscribe there on the ishanshow.com for more in-depth analysis. We're also active on X and Instagram, so be sure to follow us there as well for breaking news posts and updates about the show. Every time someone tells me that the Ishan S. Show is the reason they went out to vote or they paid attention to a news cycle, it means the world to me. Thank you for your incredible support over the past 3 years. Your engagement and dedication mean the world to me. And as we head into the final weeks of the 2024 election, I look forward to continuing this journey together. And now we're going to return back to the great episode that we have planned for you. So we have also now learned that President Biden kept the decision to drop out of this presidential race very close to himself. He had told no one but a couple of family members and his key advisors like Ricchetti and Donnellan. And that was just to control the narrative and make sure that people didn't leak anything. This is his last big decision, and I think he deserved to have that. Vice President Harris, who took his place as the candidate herself, did not know what was going on until the day of, so just a few hours before. He notified his campaign staff at 1:45 p.m. and the statement went out at 1:46 p.m. You might notice in the statement that Vice President Harris posted that we read earlier that she didn't automatically call herself the Democratic nominee like Biden already was slated to be, and he endorsed her, so you would think that she was the nominee. But she said that she intended on earning and winning the nomination. It was a very subtle but intentional way of saying that other people who wanted to run against her could. It was a form of legitimizing her ascension to the top of the ticket and not make it seem like a coronation, which is smart. But Kamala Harris did actually very rapidly consolidate support within the Democratic Party, because representatives like, Representative Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, who had called on Biden to step out of the race, got in line behind the vice president very quickly. Bill and Hillary Clinton also threw their support behind Harris. There were concerns about potential challenges from within the party, from well-known Democrats. The concern came predominantly from a bunch of governors who have become stars in this party, but even they have gotten in line behind Harris. Independent Senator Joe Manchin, in typical chaos-causing fashion for his party, his former party, was rumored to be considering re-registering as a Democrat and running for president against Harris. You might remember he actually was initially thinking of running for president earlier this year. Spoiler alert, he went from being ambiguous about running for president at 6:45 a.m. on Monday morning to outright denying that he was thinking of it at 7:15 a.m., so just a half hour later. He's a funny guy. Harris, in the immediate aftermath of all of this, made phone calls to party leaders for 10 hours to shore up support. The Democratic base, which was depressed for 3 weeks, suddenly had this energy injected into it. Like, I was talking to Democrats who were smiling for the first time in 6 months at the thought of this presidential race. I think the drastic change in dynamics has invigorated the Democratic base beyond anything we have seen. I mean, look at the numbers. In the first 24 hours as a candidate, Harris has raised $81 million in small donations, and actually, which that made history and threw Donald Trump's $52 million out the window. Within the first 36 hours of her campaign, she made that $100 million. Harris is raising money like crazy, and I mean, we all knew that she was a prolific fundraiser, but this has beat everyone's expectation. And even big dollar donors are coming back to Harris, because now even they have pledged $150 million in super PAC support. So Harris, in her campaign, is sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars of cash. She has also consolidated the support of a majority of delegates within 24 hours of the decision, and they have overwhelmingly backed her, which is now making her the presumptive Democratic nominee. I mean, I'm sure that's the quickest someone has become a party nominee. Understandably so, Donald Trump has not been very happy with this change at the top of the Democratic ticket, and the supporters have been whining about this. Now, publicly, Donald Trump has said that Kamala Harris is easier to beat than Joe Biden. But privately, his campaign is really upset by this decision. Admittedly, they had a lot of confidence when it came to beating Biden. They would just portray him as an old guy who always had lost his train of thought, who couldn't be president. Not as much attacking him on policy as his age, but with Biden now out of the race, Trump is now the oldest candidate in American history to run for president. Doesn't look as young anymore, does he? Polling also shows that Kamala Harris is definitely a harder challenge for the former president. A new Reuters poll is now showing Harris beating Trump by 2 points, 44 to 42%. And there are reports and indications showing that once Harris if she picks the right running mate, which we'll talk more about tomorrow, she could plausibly fire up the Democratic coalition in a way that Republicans are scared. And I think that just comes from the fact that they are suffering from a bout of overconfidence. They really overestimated their tally in this race. I mean, no one even remembers anymore how united Republicans looked just in this week after the Republican National Convention, because Democrats have just hit it out of the park. Harris has energized the Democratic base, and she continues to energize young voters specifically. I mean, look on TikTok. You'll see 1 billion edits of her. Charlie XCX's new album, Brat, has now become a big part of Harris's new branding as a candidate. She is popular and she is backed by a lot of people, but arguably the most important demographic, young voters, overwhelmingly support her. A CBS poll shows that she's leading with 67%. And this is even more funny, but a report from the New Republic, among other sources, says that Trump is now having second thoughts about his VP pick, J.D. Vance. This is because Harris seems to be more popular, and Trump is rumored to want to now change his VP pick because J.D. Vance isn't exciting young voters like he thought he would. Ultimately, what's the tone of this race? I don't know, old white guy against young woman of color? Prosecutor versus convicted felon? Let's play a bit of Kamala Harris's idea of what this race is going to look like. This is her speech at the now Kamala HQ in Wilmington, Delaware.
And it is my great honor to have Joe's endorsement in this race.
You sure do.
And it is my intention to go out and earn this nomination and to win. So in the days and weeks ahead, I, together with you, will do everything in my power to unite our Democratic Party, to unite our nation, and to win this election. You know, as many of you know, before I was elected as Vice President, before I was elected as United States Senator, I was the elected Attorney General, as I've mentioned, of California, and before that I was a courtroom prosecutor. In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. And in this campaign, I will proudly put my record against his.
So that's where the new 2024 race is. Join us tomorrow as we'll take a closer look at the search for potential running mates for Vice President Harris and prepare for President Biden's new primetime address, which will happen at 7 p.m. Central Time tomorrow. If you like my commentary, then go ahead and follow us on Spotify and subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Ishan S Show and at Real Ishan Shrivastava, and subscribe to the political news blog on the ishanshow.com so that you never miss a headline and get updates about the show. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Until tomorrow, take a little time to enjoy the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics. We'll see you tomorrow.